Nothing at this moment felt like a good decision. If we stay in this water, we will eventually hit the dam and drown. But if we get out of this water, we're looking at the mean terrain of the desert. And we might have to hike for miles before we hit a road. Not to mention we have something chasing us that scales walls effortlessly. Like, it can't catch us in a desert, it probably can. Hey everybody, today's video is sponsored by Manscaped. And we're going to be talking about how Manscaped is going to help you gear up for Father's Day. We're also going to talk about the Weed Whacker 2.0 and the Handyman. I think those are two really good names. First off, let's talk about the Handyman. This thing right here is a game changer for all the dads out there. Say goodbye to unruly facial hair and say hello to a smooth, clean shave. Let's take this thing for a spin. The best part about this thing is that it's compact, so it just fits comfortably in your hand. This thing will make shaving effortless. One thing that I noticed about it is that I don't get any nicks or cuts with this thing. It must have skin-safe technology. And check this out, it's waterproof. So cleanup is a breeze. Just rinse it off under the tap, and you're good to go. I think I'm gonna keep the mustache and the goatee for the rest of this video because I think it's funny. Now let's move on to the Weed Whacker, because you know this nose is a forest. Next, let's tackle these pesky nose and ear hairs with the Weed Whacker 2.0. And trust me, Dad'll thank you for this one. Tickles a little. With its powerful motor and dual blade system, it gets the job done quickly and seamlessly. Most importantly, without any pain. Yup, you guessed it, it's waterproof to get that pesky earwax and snot off of it. So for this Father's Day, let's skip the boring gifts, the mugs, the ties, and let's get your dad something special that he'll like. Head over to manscaped.com and get 20% off plus free international shipping with promo code Dougie at checkout. Thank you again, Manscaped, for sponsoring this video. So usually I tell stories from my past, months if not years ago. Sometimes I even go far back and do childhood stories. But today's story happened just last week on a trip to Arizona. And remember, I have not been back to Arizona since the last time that I went to the Superstition Mountains, which, come to think of it, was almost 4 years ago at this point. And even though that trip had its ups and major downs, it didn't change the way that I felt about Arizona. Talk about a beautiful place. The mountains, the nature, the scenery, the culture there. I have a special place in my heart for Arizona, specifically the Phoenix area. I had to go back. It had been too long. I had to go not just for my personal pleasure, but honestly because I need some material for you guys and I need to stop being so boring. I gotta get my butt back out there. I needed to stop sitting in my basement talking about all of the old adventures that I used to go on. And I needed to actually start going on them again. So I told my girl, start packing her bags because she's in for a crazy week. So that's exactly what we did. We booked a flight, a cheap hotel, and we planned to go there for 7 days. And usually I only do weekend trips, but this time I just felt like I needed a significant amount of time out there so we could actually take our time and explore the whole region. And we were so excited because this was going to be our first real adventure together. We had visited New Jersey together and we had a great time, but she hadn't been out in the rugged country with me yet. And to be quite frank, she was very eager to get out there. And I loved the idea of it too. But that was until we hit our first rough patch of the trip. We headed out that morning, we hopped on a plane at O'Hare Airport, and we were set to land at Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix. The flight there was so smooth for the first 3 hours. And we knew that we were closing in on Phoenix and we were going to start our descent pretty soon. So we're just sitting in these seats and we're so excited. We are about to go on our first adventure together. We're about to land. We had just finished up the movie that we chose for the flight, which was the newest Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And we were just chatting, talking about the snakes that were at the end of the film, if you've seen it. And then we were joking about what we would do if we encountered any rattlesnakes this upcoming week. We were just giggling and everything was peachy. Smooth flight, good time, good snacks, we're about to land. But then the plane started rumbling. It started as a light shake, which is super common, just minor turbulence. That was happening the entire flight, just a little light shake, but this time, it just kept building. And listen, I don't have a major fear of flying, and I've been through some pretty rough turbulence from my perspective. I've done that before. So I just stayed calm and I held my girl's hand, whose name is Jess. I held Jess's hand just to make sure that she felt safe. But the rumbling didn't stop this time. It just built and built and built until it built up into this major drop. It literally felt like the plane dropped hundreds of feet in seconds. And by the time the drop bottomed out, I felt like my stomach was in my throat. And I'm starting to look around and I see everybody else looking around because everyone's looking around like we know that that drop was not normal. Most of us had never felt turbulence like that. Then the rumbling started to build again. So I start squeezing Jess's hand way harder. And I'm just whispering to her that it's going to be okay, just trying to keep her calm. But this time it felt as if the pilot was taking evasive maneuvers and was just tilting the plane side by side. He was just tilting left to right, and it seemed as if he was trying to minimize whatever turbulence that we were experiencing. So now when the major rumbles and drops occurred, we weren't just feeling those drops. We were severely tilted, and we were feeling those drops while we were tilted deep into the left and the right. And obviously, I am not a pilot. For all I know, he was doing a classic technique to minimize turbulence. But from my perspective, as a horrified passenger, felt like to me that he was doing an emergency maneuver and we were actually in danger. And this major turbulence just went on and on for about 10 minutes straight until finally the pilot spoke over the loudspeaker. And he just said, "Hey guys, I apologize for the ruckus. The descent into Phoenix is always bumpy." He just said, "I'm sorry, I did not see that turbulence coming. We call that clear turbulence, and the rest of the ride is going to be primarily smooth." And listen, I didn't tell you this part of the story because it's super cool and spooky and felt like a near-death experience. Turbulence is super common. We just caught a bad breeze. I'm telling you this because it changed my whole perspective on this trip that we were about to take. When the plane was rumbling and I felt that first drop, I wasn't scared for myself. I was scared for Jess. I was horrified at the idea that I made her come on this trip with me and I couldn't protect her. This plane might lose a wing and it might go down and there's nothing that I can do to protect her. I'm supposed to keep her safe, and for that 10 minutes, I felt like I wasn't doing that. I felt like that I had put her in harm's way by trying to take her to Phoenix. And I hated that feeling. It made me resent myself. I was so mad at myself for putting her in that situation. And luckily, we landed safely. Nothing happened on the flight, just a minor scare, and we did our best to shake off the anxiety of that flight once we landed. But I hadn't shaken off that protective feeling that I had over her. Leading up to this, I had always went on trips and adventures with my boys. We all knew going into these trips with me and my friends, we all knew that we were taking a risk. And obviously, we're there to support each other. If it went south, we would be there for each other. But it's an incredibly different feeling taking that risk with the girl that I love. And I love my friends, do not get me wrong, but there's an unspoken agreement between men on a mission. The agreement is that feelings don't matter in life or death situations. We make the best decision available at the time for survival. And if that means, hey bro, my leg is stuck under this tree and the best bet for both of us to survive is that you leave me here, because if you stay here, you're not going to survive. You need to go get help, and if we both stay, we both die. So you have to leave me here stuck. It's that plain and simple. That is the situation. That is what we're going to do. There's no emotions attached to it. And I realized at that moment that I could not make those kinds of decisions with Jess. And I realized that my emotions wouldn't allow me to protect her the way that I needed to. Because see, when I'm out in the national parks with my boys Sam, Abdullah, all my friends, when we're stirring up trouble, we make tactical decisions. And that kind of decision making is what's kept us safe over the years. It has gotten us out of very sticky situations on multiple occasions. And I knew that I couldn't bring Jess in those types of situations with me because my feelings for her would be a liability to our safety. But I didn't know how to tell her that. We just landed. I don't want to ruin her trip right here and right now. Like, I still wanted her to have fun and feel like she got an adventure. I wanted her to feel like she went on an adventure with me. And I felt like the best way for me to do that for her was to fill up this trip with as many small touristy things as possible. And all of the outdoorsy stuff that we were going to do was going to be in very controlled environments. So we went to the Litchfield Park Zoo where you get close to the animals. We went to the botanical gardens where you're kind of like walking through the desert and seeing all the plants. We went to the aquarium, we got to pet stingrays, then we went horseback riding at the McDonald Ranch and we got to actually get on horses and walk them through the desert. Anything that felt outdoorsy to me that didn't actually put Jess into real danger. And honestly, to be fair, the horseback riding was a bit more dangerous than I was expecting. We saw 2 rattlesnakes on trail within the first 15 minutes, but our horses didn't notice them, so we just kept it pushing. That place was awesome. So I felt like I was doing a very good job of protecting her, but still giving her the sense as if she was going on an adventure with me. I felt like I was doing a good job. And it worked for the first 4 days, but once we got to the 5th day, we kind of ran out of touristy things to do. And Jess was getting antsy. She wanted to get out there. We went to this really nice breakfast spot that we kept going to called Protein House, just very healthy. And the whole time we were eating, I was just researching like safe things that we could do to fill up these last 2 days. And I was frantically typing because Jess just kept asking, like, can we go to the Superstition Mountains again? Because she loved that story from the last time that I went there and she wanted to go back there with me. I was absolutely panicking because I know how dangerous those mountains are. I know the types of things and the types of people that you could cross paths with. And I was going to do everything in my power to get us to go somewhere else without just feeling that I didn't want to create a new story with her. And as much as I was trying to hide my true intentions to keep her safe, she saw right through it. And she finally confronted me about it after my 5th mindlessly boring suggestion. And she just looked at me and just kind of playfully was like, you really that scared to go back? It's okay if you are, just tell me. I didn't really know what to say at first, and it crossed my mind to just go along with what she said and play into the fact that I was scared. But it just wasn't true. I wasn't scared of those mountains. Been there, done that. I was scared of not being able to keep her safe in those mountains. So I finally fessed up. I just said, we don't really have the proper clothes and equipment to do something like that. I just don't think it's responsible for me to take you out there, especially in that specific mountain range. I don't want to take you anywhere that I'm not confident that I could keep you safe. She definitely wasn't expecting me to say that because this entire trip was born because we were going to do the first crazy thing we've ever done together. And I was completely switching up on her after we arrived. But I could see that she understood where I was coming from, but she was still very eager to negotiate. So she just quickly started twiddling something with her thumbs onto her phone and then turned the screen very sassily towards me and said, what about here? And she's just showing me a Google image picture of a pack of beautiful horses drinking from a river. So naturally I just ask, where's that? So she goes very playfully, it's the Salt River. They say that we could kayak or paddleboard there or tube, and they say we might even see wild horses on the end of the river. She goes, look, there's a shuttle bus that takes us to the drop-off point, and there's a whole business that's attached to it, so it's way safer than just going into a random national park. Plus, it's right by the Superstition Mountains, so we could at least drive by so I could see them. See, I still wasn't fully convinced because I'm not an expert on rivers by any means. But by looking at the pictures, it did seem pretty safe, at least where this business was set up. But still, I was just giving excuses. We were sitting at a restaurant. It was already 11 a.m. So it was a little bit late to do like a nature excursion. Usually you want to get out there at like 8 a.m. and we're in regular people clothes. We would have to go all the way back to the hotel, which was like 25 minutes away in the opposite direction. We'd have to drive all the way back to the hotel just to change clothes, and then we'd have to drive all the way to the river just to get there so we could actually get on the river before this place closes. And that would be like 40 to 50 minutes. I was just coming up with any excuse under the sun to keep her safe. But she finally cut me off, and much less playful this time. And she said, hey, I know what I signed up for being with you. I just want to see the wild horses. And she had this look in her face that just completely changed my mind. I could see in her heart that she wanted to connect with me on this level. She knows all of my old stories at this point, way more than you guys know. I've probably told her every single one of them 3 times over. She wanted to make memories with me here. She wanted to make a story with me, and it was selfish of me to take that away from her. She's supposed to be the person that gets access to all of the best sides of me because she's the person that puts up with all of the worst sides of me on a daily basis. And I was depriving her from that. We came here for an adventure, and I was going to give her one. So I just look her right in the face, and I'm like, all right, let's go. And she looks at me a little bit confused, and she goes, back to the hotel? And I go, nope. There's a Dick's Sporting Goods across the street, and we're going to get everything right now, and we're headed straight to the river. See, I wanted to elevate the experience now because I had wasted 4 days of our trip sheltering her. We were going to buy everything that we needed right then and there, and we were going to be at that river in 25 minutes tops. It's not like we had anything at the hotel that would help us on a river anyway. We had some basic hiking clothes and stuff like that, but we needed like waterproof bags, water shoes, durable swimsuits, hydro flasks for hydration that we could clip onto us, and an iPhone case that is like sealed, so if you drop it in the river, it's fine. Specifically the iPhone case because Jess just wanted to take pictures of the horsies. So I just thought, what could be more exciting for my girl than a little shopping spree before our first real adventure together? And I was right. It heightened the mood. There's something so special about doing something spontaneous like that. From 1 second sitting at breakfast hitting a stack of protein pancakes and a bison burrito to the next second saying, screw it, we're buying everything we need right now. we are headed there and we're not wasting one more second of this trip together. We are going on a mission right now. Get a new outfit, new shoes, all the gear that we think we need, and change in the car on the way so we don't waste another second of our day. I encourage you all to do this, by the way. Just decide to do something amazing one of these days with somebody that you love. I know that I'm saying we went on a shopping spree. Realistically, we spent like $80, and it only cost $80 to make a lifelong memory together. And I'm sure that so many people live in Phoenix and never even go to the Salt River. Just go see the beauty of your city wherever you are. You won't regret it, even when things go south, which happened fairly quickly for us. The drive to Salt River from Phoenix was gorgeous. It was filled with unbelievable mountain views, and for me, the desert is gorgeous. The desert is so different but so vibrant in its own way. There's something special about a place with so much scarcity but so much teeming life. Everything in that desert is incredibly resilient and has adapted to those harsh conditions. It's not a lush, bright green forest with an abundance of food and water. This place is like the salty spittoon. When you get there, the cactuses check you at the door and ask you how tough are you, and unless you have a good example, you're not allowed in. Everything in that desert is dangerous and fighting for survival. There's even a species of cactus that will shoot projectile hooked needles into your skin if you brush too close to it. So whenever I drive through there, I always get this deep sense of respect for the area and the people that choose to live there. And we decided to pop over to the Superstition Mountains before heading to the river, just so Jess could get the sense of how immense that mountain range is. We just pulled up to the entrance and took some photos, but that place is exactly how I remember it. Massive, intimidating, and borderline ominous when you're looking at it. But we didn't go into the mountain range that day. Specifically that day, we had a date with wild horses at the river. And it was already a little bit late to get onto the river for tubing. We knew we were cutting it close, so we just had to head over to the Salt River. When we finally pulled up to the headquarters or the business location of the Salt River, the vibes there were great. There were plenty of people hopping out of their cars as excited as we were. We were a little bit concerned that we might be too late to grab a shuttle bus, but with the amount of people that were just getting out of their cars at that moment, I knew that we were good. So we started excitingly changing into our new clothes and our new water shoes and throwing our stuff in our new waterproof satchel. And once we were finished, we just popped out, threw the sunscreen on, headed to the front desk. And the front desk guy was great. He could tell that it was our first time there, so he gave us a great breakdown of the rules. And just a brief breakdown of how the day is gonna go. And this is very important, so listen closely. We were at the headquarters. Once he gave us a tube, we were to get onto the shuttle bus. The shuttle bus was going to drive us way upstream so we could enter the river miles back. And we're gonna float down the river until we end at headquarters, and there's gonna be a shuttle bus at the bottom of this hill, and they're gonna drive us back up to return our tubes. There were 4 major points on the river. The furthest up the river that the shuttle could take you was point 1, and the last stop where you exit is 4. And there was 2 other exit points or entry points if you were to go there yourself, where you could either take a break or exit prematurely if you wanted. 2 and 3. And see, usually on regular days, if we had come earlier, the shuttle would take you all the way to point 1, and you would float down the river for about 3.5 hours before you got to point 4. But since we made the choice to go later in the day, they were only willing to take us to point 2, which would take us about 2.5 hours to get back to 4. Does that make sense? And that was completely okay with us because we didn't want to be on the water as it was getting dark. And the front desk guy made it extremely clear that if we missed exit point 4, that we would have to exit the stream by ourselves and walk back no matter how far we were. We couldn't call them for help. He said that right before you get to exit point 4, you will see a very clear sign that will tell you to start moving over to the left of the river so it's easy for you to exit at point 4 and you don't miss it. He emphasized that if we don't start going to the left to get off at that exit point 4 and we're stuck on the right of this river, we will have a very difficult time getting off because the river picks up rapidly at that point. And if we're not all the way to the left, if not at least halfway to the left, we will almost certainly miss it. And see, this was a warning that I took very seriously. I took that to heart. There was no way that I was walking back through that unforgiving terrain filled with spikes and snakes with water shoes on. Just walking through the desert with my ankles out, ready to get sniped by a rattlesnake hiding under a dehydrated shrub. And I just made mental notes of all of the tips that he gave us to avoid hazardous spots in the river. And honestly, I actually started to get a little bit nervous again. It's not like we were in a boat or on a kayak or on a paddleboard and we had oars to direct ourselves. He just gave us these silly black donut looking tubes that didn't even have handles. It was just a round donut looking thing, damn near an old tire. I had my suspicions of safety hazards there, but everybody else that was there seemed to just be so unbothered with all of these red flags. And they all just seemed like locals who had done this plenty of times, so it did make me feel a little bit better. And in hindsight, I should have attributed the blind confidence that all those people had with the clear pregame that they all took part in. Salt River is clearly a party spot, and everybody was properly lubricated before arriving. Our shuttle bus was filled with 3 frat kids that were surprisingly nice and respectful. Honestly, a breath of fresh air for a frat kid. Another group that was a very obvious first double date, and they were just talking about each other's astrology rising signs and seeing how compatible they were. And a Canadian couple with a quiet blonde girlfriend and a very funny talkative Canadian boyfriend. Me and Jess mostly keep to ourselves in general. We aren't opposed to a chat with strangers, but we do usually steer clear of people that are boozing. And that's no disrespect to anybody that's blowing off some steam trying to have a good time. But we're both pretty soft spoken, and usually we'll get trampled in conversations with people that have been drinking and they just start shouting at us and talking our ears off. We just end up standing there just kind of awkwardly smiling as they're just barking at us. So we just kind of kept to ourselves, other than the nice funny Canadian kid striking up a conversation with me from across the shuttle. And he leaned in to talk to me and he goes, "Yo, do they really just let us on this river unsupervised? This is my first time here." I laughed because it was just such a funny, candid question. And he was genuinely confused, as I was too, that they were about to just let an entire group of pretty buzzed up people just hop on some tubes and float down a legitimate river in the middle of nowhere. So I just laughingly say, "Bro, I was thinking the same thing. This is an accident waiting to happen." I got a solid chuckle out of him, and he ended up just offering me a Zin. A very kind gesture, but I had just kicked that habit a couple months ago. And as hard as a Zin bomb would hit at that moment, I had to decline. A Zin is a nicotine product, by the way. Don't do them, you'll get addicted. It didn't take us very long to get to the drop-off point. We hopped off the shuttle first because we were at the front of the bus, but then we stepped to the side and we just kind of baited our time, waited for everybody else to get off because we wanted them to lead the way because we didn't really know what to do. We were complete newbies here, so we wanted to see what the experienced people did first, so we didn't do anything out of the ordinary. It seemed like everybody was just very simply tying all their tubes together, putting a bucket into an extra tube with like ice and drinks in it, sitting in their tube all at the same time with synchronicity, and just letting the river take them all away. It looked simple enough to me. We didn't have the bucket with ice, we just had our hydro flasks and our waterproof bag. And we didn't even have rope to tie our tubes together like the other people, but we were okay with that because one of the warning signs on the way down specifically said to not do that. I'm not sure why the sign said not to, and I'm also not sure why the experienced people acted as if that rule didn't exist and shouldn't have existed. But we didn't have rope anyway. So after we saw enough examples from all of the others, we made our way into the river. First off, I am so happy that we bought water shoes because the base of that river was all slimy rocks. Those things would be impossible to get any traction on with bare feet. The river was only about a foot deep where we started, but the current was incredibly strong. The water was only halfway up my shins, but with the slimy bottom of the river, we were actually both having trouble with our footing. I had the waterproof bag and both the water bottles because I just wanted to make it as easy for Jess as possible. She just had her lanyard that it was attached to her waterproof case for her phone so she could take pictures so we could remember this. So naturally, she was able to maneuver into a floatable position onto her tube before I was. And she started drifting away immediately. We even tried to sit down at the same time so we didn't separate. But within the first 5 seconds, we're 20 feet apart. And I was still trying to balance my body properly on the tube to float properly. It took me 3 major adjustments on this tube to get properly floating. And by the time I got moving, Jess was 50 feet away. And it's not like we were in rapids, so I wasn't freaking out. But I definitely felt some nerves building, like she was far away. Because we'd never been here. For all I know, the river keeps this pace this entire time. And now we're about to spend the next 2.5 hours desperately paddling towards each other to no avail. I'm trying so hard to close the distance with her, paddling with my hands, feeling absolutely useless because I just have my butt in this donut hole, just splashing my hands in the water, getting nowhere. And I could only get like my hand and half my forearms in the water, so I have no paddling power. I'm making no progress. And I'm trying not to shout because everybody here is just chilling on their tubes with beers. And I don't want to shout and embarrass us. But that was only until I saw some water around the bend that started looking a little bit choppy. And the people that are in the tubes that are going over that choppy water up there look like they're picking up speed and getting a little turbulence themselves. Now I'm getting really worried because Jess is gonna reach that portion of the river first. And if she falls into the river at a rapid portion, all of my concerns of this trip and taking her out here to do something like this are going to come true. So I'm just flapping my stupid hands in this water like a useless baby duck when an absolute godsend floats by. That super nice Canadian kid from the shuttle just comes cruising by me and he just says, "Just turn around and backstroke, you get way more power, bud." He was totally right, because trying to paddle forward on a tube when your butt's in the hole is useless, and he was flying with the backstroke. So I swivel and I turn my back towards Jess and I start intensely backstroking in her direction. I'm using all my force. My arms halfway up my biceps are in the water now, so I'm flying. I would do 10 hard, powerful strokes before I turned my head just to make sure I was still in the same direction towards her, and then I'll just get right back to it. Even with this new stroke technique, it was going to be a razor close finish to get to her before she entered these rapids. And the water started getting choppy when we were just in arm's reach from each other, but our hands couldn't quite connect. We were barely tapping fingertips, so I just tried to turn myself on this donut and I stuck my foot out for her. And I just told her to grab onto it because my leg's going to extend significantly further than my arm's going to. So I just wanted her to grab my ankle and pull me towards her. So once she grabbed a hold of my foot and ankle, I hamstring curled her towards me until I could jam my other foot into her tube's donut hole and our legs could intertwine and then we wouldn't separate again. We just got steady when we started to enter this thing that I thought was a rapid from the distance. It definitely was a faster and stronger portion of the river, but it felt like nothing more than just a fun water ride. A little bumpy and splashy, but overall fun. Once we were back together and our tubes were connected, I was so relieved. The thought of watching her float away from me down into rapids was gut-wrenching. So I tried my best to keep calm so I didn't embarrass her or alarm her in that situation. Again, I wanted her to feel like she was on a fun adventure, but I was having such a hard time getting over this overwhelming protectiveness. And after that small patch of rapids, the river was super calm for a long stretch. It was basically a lazy river, and everything felt super safe for a while. We were just out in nature and we were taking in this beautiful landscape. We were just chatting and giggling. The only slight issue was that everybody else that was near us on the river was starting to go from a little tipsy to straight up drunk. Again, no shade to people that are partying. Absolutely understand. It's just kind of tough to be around when you're not partaking in the festivities. And to be honest, it was kind of funny and bearable until a group of girls couldn't steer clear of the edge of the river, and they just went straight into this dense vegetation that overhangs the banks of the river. They were in absolutely no danger, yet they were screaming at the top of their lungs for minutes, just because desert grass was getting in their hair. And actually, that wasn't even the last straw for us. That was annoying. It was when a marshmallow fight started and I got pelted in the eye with a stray mallow. I was in the middle of a sentence, I just caught a stray to the face. Apparently marshmallow fights are common on the Salt River, but I was done. We both decided that we're going to turn our backs to the downstream and we're both going to start backstroking until we are well far ahead of the partiers. It took us almost 10 minutes of consistent backstroke to get out of earshot and eye shot of the rest of the group. We put a really good amount of effort getting that far ahead of them just to get a little bit of isolation and quiet for ourselves, but it was a horrible mistake. Getting isolation for peace and quiet was not the mistake. Not taking into account that we were actively pushing ourselves downstream with the flow of the river was our mistake. We must have covered twice as much ground as we thought and really picked up a lot of momentum because we must have cut off 40 minutes of our trip. We also didn't take into account that they had dropped us off at a closer drop-off point. So taking off almost 40 minutes of a float left us with only like 1 hour left of float time before we had to exit at exit 4. And that's including the hour that we had already spent on the river. These are all approximates, by the way. We completely lost track of time and distance. And we had spent the whole first half of the float just stressing about staying together. We didn't know how much time had passed. And obviously we were avoiding the partiers. Like, we were very preoccupied. We just didn't have a good gauge of time. And once we were fully isolated, we started having an amazing time. It was a great trip down the river, but we had started our mental clock there. The issue was that we were starting to relax into the adventure when we should have started being vigilant for exit signs. And when I look back at it, I try to think about where we could have made the mistake where we missed the sign to start moving to the left for exit 4. And the only instance that I could think of where we were just completely distracted was the first time we came across a pack of wild horses. They were lining the left side of the river, a really big, beautiful pack, and some were even crossing in front of us. And the river was moving pretty fast at that point, so we only had a minute or two to get a good look at them while we're trying to avoid the ones that are literally in front of us in the stream. And I think that must have been where the sign was. That's the only thing that I could pin down where I was completely distracted and not aware of my surroundings. And it was the only spot where I wasn't being vigilant before the second group of horses. We didn't get close enough to the first group for Jess's liking. She wanted to get a little bit closer, but not too close for safety reasons. She just wanted to get a really good look at them. So when we saw the second group of horses that we saw that day on the right side of the river, I made sure that we got as close as we possibly could, all the way to the right. She just wanted to get some good pictures, so I wanted to get close for her. This was a horrible mistake. It was an honest mistake, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a horrible one. There were so many factors at play that led us into the perfect sequence of events happened to put us into danger. When we were passing the second group of horses, I noticed that to the left, there was a pretty big pull-off point. It was a pretty big rocky beach, and it looked kind of how the front desk guy described as the number 4 pull-off that we should absolutely not miss. But at that point, I still hadn't seen the sign that he said that we absolutely wouldn't miss. He said it was as clear as day. We still hadn't seen that sign that told us to start moving to the left, and we were all the way to the right. Plus, we had not even been out there that long. We hadn't been checking our phone. Obviously, I just said we weren't keeping track of time really well. We didn't realize that us separating ourselves from everybody else and how far we went downstream put us that far ahead. And we were currently zooming by our only exit point. And like I said, we made the decision to go there late, so there was nobody on this beach pulling off their tubes, so it was pretty empty. We're like, all right, nobody else is getting off. We were the last group to get dropped off, and we were just about an hour, hour and a half away from sunset. So here we are, just laughing, cruising by our only exit point, taking pictures of horses with not a care in the world. I didn't even mention anything to Jess about the pull-off point when I noticed it. I just figured that since there was no sign about a quarter mile back, this must not be it. So I let us continue to float downstream for almost 30 minutes. The paddling way ahead of the partiers really messed up our gauge of time, because after about 30 minutes, we were both kind of like looking around, and almost simultaneously we said something along the lines of, are you seeing any signs anywhere to like tell us when to start pulling off? Because in our heads, our brain clocks were going off. It felt like just about 2.5 hours had passed, so we should probably be pulling off soon. But we had passed our exit point 30 minutes earlier, so we just continued to float. But I started to get nervous because the river just started to look different. Most of the time while we were on here, there were like small pull-off points and beaches and like little trails just about every quarter mile, every half mile. But now it was starting to look like a straight canyon. There was no way to get off safely. It didn't seem like there were any exit points. There was straight drop cliffs on one side and spiky foliage and a big hill on the other side. And once my brain clock went off and I was like, it's been about 2.5 hours, I wanted to pull off to the side and I wanted to wait for all of the other partiers to catch up so we could see when they're leaving, just to make sure that like we're all in a big group, we're all gonna exit at the same spot. And at least me and Jess would know that we hadn't gone too far. Even if they were a little bit annoying, even if they were a burden, we'd know that we were safe. But there were no safe pull-off points. There was no spot where we could comfortably get to the edge and get onto the shore. And I was starting to panic, but I didn't want Jess to notice. I wanted her to feel safe. And I couldn't tell if it was me working myself up again or if we were actually in real danger. And whenever I start to feel like that, I get like hyper aware. It feels like my body is injecting adrenaline into my bloodstream, and there's no detail about our surroundings that I'm not taking in and observing. And I'm sitting there on this tube with my butt in this donut hole. My mind is running 1,000 miles an hour and I'm trying to hide it from Jess. And we start passing this massive canyon wall, which is by far the largest wall we've passed yet. And I start to get like weird goosebumps. And again, I don't know if it was me being hyper aware or we really just entered somewhere that we shouldn't have. But something felt different about where we were. This wall was massive and it laid a shadow over the entire area. It was the darkest section of the river that we've went through so far. It was just coming about dusk at this point, but the shadow that this wall provided made it feel like it was nighttime while we were under it. And I just couldn't shake the feelings that I was having. Everything felt wrong with the river at this point. Even the water was starting to look deeper. Most of the time I'd be able to see the bottom. It could have been that it was getting darker, but I just couldn't see the bottom anymore. Like usually we'd be able to see rocks. It just didn't feel like we should be exposed out here. On random tubes in the dark on this river that we're not familiar with were sitting ducks. Guys, I know you love the story, but you'll love the lives just as much. The community is amazing on there. I just want everybody to be a part of the giveaways that we're doing. I want to give back to the community that's giving so much to me. So please, I want to see you on Monday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a live. Appreciate you guys. Back to the show. But like I said, I couldn't panic in this situation, and I didn't want Jess to panic either. I could tell that she was starting to get the sense that something was wrong, and I was about to make the call for both of us that we should probably start heading off to one of the edges of the river to at least hold on to something on one of the edges. If there's a branch hanging over or anything like that, that we could just stay in the same spot to wait for everybody else to catch up to us. That was the best idea that I could come up with at the time. Just get to the side and hold on to something. If we just find something that could keep us in the same place, at least we weren't going further downstream, because every second we float further, we're extending our potential hike back to headquarters even further. But almost simultaneously, as I'm about to make this call to get off to the edge of the river, I see something in my peripheral vision to my right, and I try my best to turn my head to see what is that movement, but my movement is super limited because I'm stuck in this little donut tube. I just barely get my head and my eyes to my right to see it. And on the right side of the river where this massive wall was, there was some type of opening to a cave or cavern about 40 feet up this wall. It was just smack dab in the middle of this enormous wall, and I don't even know if I would call it a cave. To access it, you would have to rappel down from the top or like use one of those spiked axes and climb up to it. I don't know if caves are considered something that you could walk into, but just a hole in the side of a cliff, I don't know if that's actually a cave. It just looked like a hole in the middle of this wall. The only thing that I could imagine living in there would be maybe like bats or birds, because they could fly in and out of it. It was completely inaccessible. Not to mention it was a straight drop from the entrance of the cave to the river below. But I saw some movement coming from inside of it. I swear I did. But as I'm staring into this cave, I could only see blackness for the first couple seconds. But as I keep staring into it, in this black abyss of this oddly placed cave, I see a light silhouette of a figure inside of it. But I mean barely see a silhouette. If I wasn't looking for something inside of it, I wouldn't have seen it. It was so faint that even when I was looking at it, I was questioning if I was actually seeing it. It was as if the figure that was standing in this cave was 2% brighter than the blackness behind it. Just barely, faintly visible. I could tell that it was standing at the edge of the cave and it was looking out because its body was lightly bobbing, as if it was a dog that was panting right after it got done sprinting, but it closed its mouth to become alert, so it was just... It was taking such deep, slow breaths that I could see it expanding and contracting with each breath. But I still couldn't make out any details about it. I couldn't see any eyes shining from inside the darkness or any features about it, but I could just tell that it was looking at us. And it felt like to me that it came to the edge of the cave because we were floating by. And there was no way of gauging how big this thing was because the whole of this cave is like 40 feet up this wall. Like, it's pretty far. I can't tell how big this thing is. And we're floating in the middle of the river, so we're half the width of the river away from the wall. I'm just looking up. It's in the distance and it's high up. I can't tell how big it is. But the opening of the cave, just a rough estimate, looked as if whatever is in there could be at least the size of a large breed dog, if not bigger. And I'm trying my best to keep my eyes on it, but we're floating further downstream by the second. And I know that I need to make the choice to get us to the edge of the river so I could fill Jess in with my concerns as quickly as possible. But there was something about whatever it was that I was looking at. This needed my full attention at that moment. And I just kept staring at this thing until we got far enough away that I felt like I could take my eyes off of it. And as I made the personal decision to take my attention off of it and turn my attention back towards Jess to start talking about the game plan, I swiveled my eyes from left to right. And during that time, it started moving again, almost instantaneously from me taking my eyes off of it. I mean the nanosecond my attention wasn't on it, it started moving again. And in that split second, from my peripheral vision, I saw it exit the cave. It didn't poke its head out, it didn't fly away, it didn't attempt to climb down to the riverbank, it exited the cave vertically. It's as if it grabbed the wall above the cave and started scaling the wall to the top of the cliff. It moved as if it was a shadow making its way up the wall, just effortlessly. And in that millisecond where I started to look away and then immediately swung my head back, it had successfully scaled the cliff and was now standing motionless on top of the cliff, watching over the valley, having a clear point of view where we are and the river that we're floating through. But it's not like I got a better look at what it really was. I just barely saw it while it was moving. I saw the absolute tail end of it moving before it froze into its hiding spot. And I say hiding spot, but I don't mean it was tucked behind a boulder or something. This thing was hiding in plain sight. I saw it roll from the bottom to the top until it was in a position that was indistinguishable from a saguaro cactus. I wouldn't have been able to tell that it wasn't a cactus if I didn't see the tail end of it shaping itself into the cactus. It was almost like one of those wacky, wavy, inflatable arm flailing tube men, and it started from the bottom to the top until it froze into its position. But I knew for sure that there wasn't a saguaro cactus above that cave before that. But how can I point this out to Jess? The sun was setting and it just looked like a silhouette of a cacti on the top of a cliff. Part of me felt like I might be dehydrated or hallucinating, but part of me knew that I was looking at something very unnatural. And this all happened in a matter of seconds. It's not like I was ignoring Jess for minutes. From her perspective, I could have just been looking back upstream the river to see if anybody else was coming up behind us, before looking back to her and making the call to pull off to the edge of the river. I wasn't wasting loads of time, but it felt like I was, so I had to make a decision right then and there what we were gonna do. Am I gonna draw attention to whatever that is on the cliff, or am I going to focus on the river? And then the questions start flooding in about Jess's safety, and I start freaking out. Whatever choices I make right now don't just fall on me, they also fall on her. And what's a bigger threat at this moment, the river or the thing that's pretending to be a cactus? And of course, how am I supposed to go about communicating with Jess all the factors that are going on right now in a way that will get her to focus but not panic and become a liability? So I try to keep my voice as calm as I possibly can so I could fill her in about what I'm seeing in a very strategic way. So I just say, babe, do you see that cactus up there on that cliff? I want you to look at it from the corner of your eye, and I want you to tell me what you see when I look towards you. Don't make it obvious. Point in the opposite direction like you're showing me something, but do not take your eye off that cactus. Do you understand me? I could feel that she senses how serious my tone is, and she just follows up with a very simple question, just to make sure that she's following my orders correctly. She simply asks, do you mean the cactus that's above the opening in that wall with the 4 arms? I very simply say yes, and then she follows up with, I'm ready when you are. So I turn my head completely towards her, and I take my eyes off it for the first time since I laid my eyes on it. And she's doing a great job faking where her attention is. But I hear the fear enter her voice as she's trying to relay to me what she's seeing. And she started off by simply saying, it's moving. What is that? But the fear came flooding in after that, so she started panically saying, it's coming this way, it's coming towards us. So I whipped my head back towards it to see how much distance it's closed on us, but I couldn't see it anywhere. I scanned the cliff, the wall, the riverbank, the water. I was just looking everywhere and I couldn't find it. My eyes are scanning every detail of the terrain, but I just can't find it. Jess breaks my panic train of thought by directing me to where she last saw it, because she could clearly tell that I'm struggling to locate it. She just goes, it's on the wall, it's right there. And she's pointing to a section of the wall that's about 20 feet upstream of us. She followed up by saying it's right above that Gatorade bottle floating in the river. And that was the perfect guide for me to track down where it was, because there isn't much floating litter in this river other than like stray marshmallows. So a lonely plastic bottle sticks out like a sore thumb. So I spot where the bottle is bobbing around, and then I scan the wall above it, but still nothing is jumping out to me until finally I see a slight movement again. And it's that same slow breathing again. It's the expanding and the contracting. But it's as if the wall itself is doing it. There's no clear indication on this wall where this thing's body begins and ends. I could just see the main section of its torso slightly expanding and contracting as it's breathing. But it's latched onto this wall, almost completely motionless, perfectly camouflaged into it. I've never seen something be capable of blending into a wall so perfectly. At least something that doesn't live at the bottom of the ocean. Not to mention, this thing closed serious distance on us in the past couple moments. It was effortlessly crawling across this cliff wall, and it's perfectly latched to a completely vertical wall, and Jess just starts repeating, "What is that? What is that? What is that?" And I could hear the panic starting to seep into her. But I wasn't completely sure if she was just becoming completely overcome with fear, or she was repeating herself to draw me back into our communication, because I wasn't saying anything. I was just staring at this thing. I was just trying to get as much visual information on this thing before making any decisions. And I finally answered her, and I chose to be honest. I didn't have the luxury of sparing her feelings in this situation, and we needed to be on the same page. And mind you, we're still aimlessly floating backwards down this river, and now we have something tracking us and following us, so we have to give it our attention. But in doing so, we aren't guiding our tubes in a responsible way, and there's a huge potential that we go into a rapid section or careen into the foliage on the end of the river and get stuck like those drunk girls earlier. But anyway, I start replying to Jess without looking back at her, which broke my heart, because I just wanted to look her in the eye and tell her that she was going to be okay. But all I was able to say was, "Jess, it doesn't move while we're watching it. I don't think it knows we can see it, otherwise it would move regardless of us looking in this direction. We need to pull off the river as soon as possible to the opposite side, and we need to start hiking back. I know I'm piling onto bad news, and I know this is a lot. I think we passed the pull-off point by accident. I need you to stay calm, and we can get out of here." And I'm giving her this pep talk while I'm still sitting useless with my butt in this donut hole tube, feeling completely useless, not to mention completely vulnerable. And we're still steadily drifting away from this thing, but I know that neither of us stopped looking at it in fear of losing its exact position. And as the moments keep passing and passing, we're getting further and further, and we're about to start entering a wind in the river. It's almost like we're turning a corner, like we're taking a turn on the river, and part of me is feeling relieved. That thing is staying where it's at, and it's getting further and further away from us. But then I realize something, and it terrifies me. And the thought must have hit Jess at the exact same moment it hit me, because she blurted out, "We should let it move before we turn this corner so we don't lose sight of it. It's better that we know where it is, even if that means that it's closer to us." She was totally right, so we both decide to do the exact same maneuver as before. But this time I point in a random direction, we both turn our heads, but we both keep our corner of our eye on it. And like clockwork, the second our heads turned, its camouflage changed from the perfect shade of a rock that kept itself completely hidden on this wall to what looked like a black shadow, and its body just lifted itself off the wall, reminiscent of a tarantula standing up. It went from completely flush to the wall to protruding a little bit off of it, which seemed to be some type of extremities latching itself to the wall, so it had legs or arms or something along those lines. It was so hard to get a real exact description of what it looked like from the corner of your eye. It just looked like a black cloud, like shadow closing in on you. It's so hard to focus on something from your peripheral. You just see it. It's there, it's moving, it's dark, it has a body and legs, but its exact shape and features are a complete blur. And we're wrapping around the corner of this river, and it's closing in on us again. It's fast. And my plan was to let it get right around this wall with us and then turn back to it so it would freeze again. And even though it got closer to us, it would still be in our line of sight for much longer. And as I'm waiting for it to come around the corner, Jess must have taken a glance to where we were heading down the river, because I heard her start frantically paddling. So I shout, "What's behind us?" And she quickly replies, "The river is splitting." And I have no choice but to look back, because clearly she's panicking. It's something serious. And I turn my head and I see that there's an island splitting the already narrow river. It's not a split that's pushing the river into two different directions. The river's still flowing all in one direction. There's just a strip of rocks and foliage right down the middle. It's just protruding right out of the water, right in the middle of the river. So you can't stay floating directly in the middle of the river, otherwise you're about to crash into rocks. You have to choose either right or left, but after about 30 feet, this island ends. And you could go back to floating in the center. It's just a quick little split in the river. And naturally, we chose to frantically paddle to the left to get as far away from this wall as we possibly could, because that thing is definitely still closing in on us, and it's attached to that wall. And at this point, I would much rather risk crashing into the spiky plants and foliage on the opposite side of the river instead of going to the right and potentially this thing could reach us from the wall. And this area of the river was much more narrow than most of the areas that we had been through so far. It seemed like the last stretch of the middle section of the river before it opened up quite a bit into the lower section. It got really narrow for a small stretch, but if you looked all the way back downstream, it really opened up into the lower section about a half mile to a mile down. So me and Jess are just frantically backstroking out of the way of this island split, and we barely make it to the left. And we got so close to the island that the water had gotten so shallow, I slammed my tailbone into a rock at the base of the river, and it almost capsized me with how hard it made me raise my hips out of the tube hole. But I somehow managed to stay on and continue floating. And this whole time, we're just getting tossed around by the river and running into rocks in the shallow part that are protruding from the bottom. But the only thing that I could feel is the sense that this thing is right behind us, and we're gonna have no idea where it is when we turn around. We completely lost it, and the way it could camouflage, we're not gonna find it. And when we just got steady after a really rocky part, the second we felt safe again, I had to contort my body to fully turn back upstream to try to get my eyes on it again. I cannot stress this enough. We were in small donut tubes that didn't even have handles, we didn't have paddles, and our legs are intertwined to keep us connected to each other so we don't drift away from each other. Turning around in these things was incredibly difficult. We'd have to disconnect our legs, try to rotate our tube without drifting apart, then reconnect in a moderately comfortable way to fully turn around. But we did not have that kind of time. I just lifted my hips and twisted my upper torso and just put my head to the sky to look directly behind us. I'm not sure if you could picture that, but it was not safe or comfortable. But I'm happy that I didn't try to readjust. I just did what I needed to do to get my eyes back upstream, and I saw it. I caught it. But the only reason that I saw it was because it was mid-jump. It had just launched itself from the cliff wall towards the protruding island in the middle of the river that we had just passed. And it must have known that mid-flight that I saw it, because as my eyes were focusing on its obscure black body and limbs, its skin faded into the colors of the island, and the second it landed, it just disappeared into the island. And I lost it once it was on the island because there was a fair amount of foliage on it. It didn't jump to the edge of it where I could see where it landed. It jumped into grass and foliage. It landed in what looked like tall straw grass, but I knew that it was on the island, and that was a win. And Jess turned around just a couple seconds later because she was struggling turning her tube, and I filled her in right away with its whereabouts. And a detail about this thing hit me like a ton of bricks at that exact moment, so I just barked it out to Jess. It doesn't like the water. It jumped from the cliff to the island. It won't go in the water. I think we're safe if we stay on the water. It gave me the most fleeting moment of relief in my life because almost immediately, Jess asked me, does this river run into Phoenix? Can we just take it all the way into the city, get off in the city where it's safe, and Uber back to the car? That would have been perfect. Oh my God, just wait this thing out, get all the way back to the civilization, Uber back, grab our truck, head back to our hotel, done and dusted. But that wasn't an option. This river runs directly into the Granite Reef Dam well before Phoenix. The Granite Reef Dam splits this salt river into the Arizona Canal for irrigation purposes. And there's no way to just float through it and get all the way into Phoenix. And if we float into the dam, we will most certainly drown. So now we need to make a choice. We either try to get as close to the dam as possible and just try to get attention from somebody working the dam, which is a very unlikely scenario that anybody is there at this time. Or we pull off and we take our chances with whatever that thing is tracking us. And as these thoughts are flying through my mind, I'm still just staring directly at that island that it landed on. And we're just fading further and further away from it. But right as we're getting a little bit too far to really see what would be on that island, I see the tall grass that's on the top of that island start to part down the middle, and I faintly see this thing starting to emerge from behind the grass. It was like a leopard slowly emerging from savanna grass, stalking its prey, and the second its prey turned its head towards it, it crouched lower into the grass. This confirmed to me that this thing was stalking us in a predatory manner. Not that all of the other things didn't draw major suspicions for me. Obviously they did, but the way that it just moved right then confirmed it. It was pursuing us and watching us. It wasn't just scampering around when we weren't looking at it and freezing when we were, because that could easily be a prey tactic. It could be keeping an eye on something that it sees as a predator, us being a predator, and just make sure that that predator doesn't see them, and just keep doing that until the predator has sufficiently left your territory. But that last movement was predatory, and I know that it saw me see it, and I knew that because this time it didn't wait for us to look away. It kept moving this time. It didn't just crouch and stay still. I saw it kind of pacing and trying to make a decision on that island. And I was just on this little stupid tube praying that it didn't enter the water. I was waiting for the moment for it to dive into the water, and if it did, I would tell Jess right away to get off the tube and start swimming as fast as she can with the stream and just slowly try to get to the edge. This way we could potentially get to shore well ahead of it and try our best to get to a road. Nothing at this moment felt like a good decision. If we stay in this water, we will eventually hit the dam and drown. But if we get out of this water, we're looking at the mean terrain of the desert. And we might have to hike for miles before we hit a road. Not to mention we have something chasing us that scales walls effortlessly. Like, it can't catch us in a desert, it probably can. And I could see this thing thinking. It was either losing patience or it was getting frantic, because we were getting further away and it was stuck on the island. The river was pretty narrow at the point where it jumped, and it was latched pretty high up the wall above the island. So when it jumped from that wall, it was very easy for it to get from the wall to the island, but there was not a lot of space for it to build momentum on the island to get to the opposite side of the river. And for just a second, I felt like it had accidentally trapped itself on that island and that we were going to be okay. We'd have a long hike ahead of us, but we were going to be fine. But then I saw it attempt to leap, and this thing had bounce. Whatever this thing was, it was an apex predator. It broad jumped about 15 feet with no momentum and cleared about half of the river for the most part. It had little to no momentum. It's not like it built up and ran. It just, like a spring, just jumped from that island to the other side of the river, and it got to the other side. Now there was no way out for us, but it did confirm one thing for me. It 100% did not like the water. Its back end landed a little bit into the water, just into the river. It almost cleared the whole river, but its back legs and like butt area landed in the water, and its knee-jerk reaction was fear. And it was panically scratching its way to get to shore like it couldn't stand the water. I didn't know what I could do with that information other than just know it and just wait until we float down to this river and drown in the dam. But it at least made me feel that as long as we stay in the middle of the river, we have some time to think. It cannot get us here. It won't risk jumping into the river to try to attack us. And I asked Jess, did you just see what I saw? And she just replied that it's scared of the water. And I just reply, yes, exactly. I could tell. You could see that it's scared of the water. But she just replies right away, how is that going to help us? And I just reply, it gives us time to think. But it really didn't actually give us time to think. This thing didn't care that we were looking at it anymore. It knew that we knew where it was, and it must have known that the dam was coming. And its meal is about to float away into the abyss unless it does something right now. And this thing is hauling ass down the side of the river, from the only side that we would be able to escape from. And this thing is closing in on us fast. And we have our backs to downstream again because we want to look upstream so we could see this thing. And also so we're able to backstroke if we need to try to get away from it on our stupid little tubes. So we couldn't see anything that was happening behind us. All we could see is that this thing was closing in on us impossibly fast, and its skin is changing colors as the backgrounds behind it are changing. As if its skin is on autopilot, just copying whatever the ground looks like under it. And this thing is getting closer to us, 50 feet, then 40 feet, then 30 feet. And the water in the river is picking up, and it's getting more bumpy. And me and Jess start to swivel around just because of the flow of the river. It wasn't voluntary. And I don't want to take my eyes off this thing, but we're involuntarily turning. And I'm trying to keep my eyes on it. But as I'm turning, I see something on the other side of my peripheral vision. And as I'm about to whip my head to see what we're about to run into, Jess yells, "Horse." And we are careening into a large herd of horses that are crossing the river and drinking from it. And a lot of the horses are on the side of the river that this thing is following us on. And the horses start making their horse sounds. And they don't sound happy that we're headed straight towards them. And they start freaking out and neighing and lifting their front legs. As I'm freaking out too, because we're just going towards these very large animals, I could see what's behind them. And I could see that the narrow part of the river that we were on is going to open up very soon. And there was room to pull off on the other side of the river from where this thing is chasing us, because the massive cliff wall that it emerged from had ended, and there was an actual pull-off point to the right instead of the left where the horses and this thing were. That was the good news. The bad news is that this river just opened up massively, and the Granite Reef Dam was right there. So if we didn't get trampled by horses in the next few seconds, there was a high likelihood that we were not going to be capable of pulling off before that dam. The current was too strong, and the river opened up too wide. We literally floated into a wild horse's hind legs, and its hoof whizzed past my ear as it retaliated, but it just barely missed as we passed through the line of them crossing. And I thought that after we passed them, they would start to settle down, but they didn't. The entire herd of horses was going wild, and they were all entering the river at the same time, running away from that thing, and they were just charging past us. They weren't just crossing in a straight line anymore. The whole herd was crossing, and they were running from that thing that was pursuing us. It was clear as day that the horses knew what that thing was, and they feared it. The whole herd started crossing the river simultaneously, and we were just covering our heads, hoping to not get trampled. But that only lasted for about 5 seconds because we're still flowing downstream, and the current is picking up significantly towards the dam. We were exiting this narrow portion of this river, and we were just in this wide part of the river, and the only next option, the only next step of this is us getting sucked into that dam. And at this point, I didn't care about that thing that was chasing us because we're so far offshore, and this river just got so wide, and there's an entire herd of horses between us and it. Our only worry at this exact moment was the current and the dam. So I whip my head around towards Jess, and I think that I'm gonna have to baby her right now. And I think that I'm gonna need to give her a pep talk before telling her that I think that we're gonna need to swim to shore right now. We're going to have to swim against the current, and we're gonna have to do it right now, and it is going to be exhausting. But she's looking at me cold. She is not scared. She's just waiting for the call, and she's ready to empty the gas tank and listen. And I was a millisecond away from telling her to jump and start swimming until I saw some movement behind her. And a second later, we got a bright flashlight shined onto us. And thank the Lord, it is a pontoon. Somebody must have been out here fishing or something and saw us. We could hear them faintly shouting, and the boat's headed straight towards us. We were going to be okay. And we do our best to backstroke towards the boat to try to assist them in saving us, but this boat was on top of us in seconds. And they just throw us a rope, and we just hold onto it, and they reel us in about 100 feet before the dam. And I could barely see who is on this boat because of all of the effort we used, like swimming against the current and the bright lights in our face. And I'm just kind of disoriented, and I climb the ladder into the pontoon. I finally get my butt out of that stupid tube, and I just make sure Jess is up the ladder first, and I crawl onto this pontoon before I look up and just start to thank our saviors. I look up and I see one man that clearly looks like the captain of this boat, and then two others with big smiles on their faces. And I'm just staring at these two, and then the Canadian boyfriend starts laughing and just says, "The exit's about 5 miles that way, bro." And I just reactively ask, "How did you know we missed it?" And he just says, "We got off right at that exit, right where those horses were, right around exit 4, where we were supposed to get off." And when we looked downstream and saw 2 little dots bobbing in the distance, and we didn't see you guys by the shuttle, we knew that those 2 dots were you two. So we went up and told the headquarters, and us 3 drove down here to make sure you guys didn't hit the dam. We were waiting almost a half hour for you guys. What took you so long? We were worried something almost got you. And at that moment, I remembered what was following us because of what he just said. So I got myself to my feet, and I looked back to where it was. It was almost completely dark at this point, but I just kept scanning the shore at where it last was, and the horses had completely left that area at this point. And it took a second, but I finally tracked it down, and I could just see it. I could see it breathing, standing on the shore, just staring at us. And there was no reason to point it out to everybody because they would never be able to spot it, and they would never believe us. But I look at Jess, and I could see that she sees it too, and we're looking at this thing before the pontoon pulls off to the small harbor that they had near the dam. And once the boat starts moving in the opposite direction, this thing just darts back into the canyon. And I'm freaked out that this thing just pursued us all the way to this point. And then once we were on a boat getting away, it just went, "I'm going back home." And I look towards Jess to share this moment of fear, but she's just smiling at me. And this girl goes, "Can we go to the Superstition Mountains tomorrow?"